The first pale blades of dawn crept over the crumbled outer walls of King's Landing, gilding the broken stones with a weary gold that seemed almost embarrassed to reveal the city's wounds. Smoke still rose in sullen pillars from blocks where wildfire and dragon flame had met and mingled, sending a faint acrid tang across the black water that would linger for seasons. Jon Snow, though the name felt half forgotten, like a childhood coat outgrown, stood upon the overlook above the Gate of the Gods, the wind tugging gently at the black curls that touched his collar. A plain circlet of beaten iron sat upon his brow, unadorned, unpolished, almost reluctant. It was the only crown he could stomach, and even that felt too heavy, for it bore the promise of more chains than a steward of the Night's Watch had ever dreamed to carry. He breathed in, slow and deep, tasting ash and salt and the faint green bite of wildfire, and let the morning seep into him until it became indistinguishable from the ache in his chest. Behind him, the Red Keep stirred like a wounded dragon in uneasy sleep. Masons, carpenters, and small folk, pressed into hurried service, moved through its courtyards and halls with hushed industry, patching cracked archways, shoring walls, and lowering charred beams with ropes and trembling prayers. Their ladder music and quiet curses mingled with the whispered flap of ravens leaving the rookery, each bearing sealed scraps that begged the realm to see sense. Yet sense itself felt rarer than dragon glass, for every raven Jon dispatched might return only dread, a lord's defiance, a lady's demand, a petty war igniting where old debts lingered. He listened nonetheless, for raven quills sang the true lay of Westeros far better than any minstrel's harp. A new chorus was needed, one that could drown the endless dirges of feudal greed. But he had only just raised his voice. He withdrew from the rampart and descended the winding stair that cut through Maegor's holdfast. The steps were slick with evening dew and dust from split stones, and each footfall echoed, a king's lonely herald. Ghost padded at his heels, winter-white fur stark against soot-dark stone. The direwolf alone moved with certainty, silent and sure, as though ruin mattered little to a creature who tasted the wild's unvarnished law since birth. Jon reached the bottom hall, and paused beneath a threadbare banner that still bore the charred outline of a three-headed dragon. Where fire had chewed away the silk, sunlight now speared through in ragged shafts, painting his black tunic with fractured halos. He drew in that light, the way a man drinks cold water after too many days in heavy mail, and let it remind him that dawn was stubborn. Always. The small council awaited in the Queen's ballroom, a once opulent chamber stripped of its crystal chandeliers and gilded sconces, for gold had new value. Wages for builders, grain for small folk, recompense for daughters widowed by distant lords' pride. Widowed by distant lords' pride. Jon liked the room better when adorned. Its long tables were plain oak now, its windows bare of colored glass, and the scarred parquet floor served as quiet testament to the dancers who would no longer glimmer across it. Here, power might yet learn humility. Davos Seaworth stood first at Jon's entrance, bowing with that sailor's ease that ignored ceremony. His thick-fingered hands still smelled faintly of tar, and truth clung to him like salt. Beside him, Tyrion Lannister offered a shorter bow, the ghost of a sardonic smile tugging at his mouth. He leaned upon a carved cane, Jaime's reforged and refitted, and his mismatched eyes flickered over the king with guarded approval and a scholar's endless tallying of debts. Samwell Tarly sat fidgeting with a sheaf of parchment, his quill smeared with ink the color of deep wine. He flashed Jon the nervous grin that once brightened dim corridors beneath Castle Black, and suddenly seemed as important as the wall itself. Across from Sam, Brian of Tarth remained standing, silent, the new Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, clad in white armor still scuffed from the fires of the city's liberation. The helm she carried was plain, unmarred by plumes or gold filigree, as she had insisted. She and the others flanked an empty chair draped with a cloth of muted gray. Sansa's sigil, the direwolf of Winterfell rendered in simple thread. The Queen in the north had yet to return to King's Landing, but her council loomed larger than half the castle south of the Neck. Jon took his seat, and ran a thumb along the smooth grain of the table's edge, as though feeling for secrets in the wood. No one spoke for a moment. Silence was its own guest, heavy and watchful. Ghosts settled at Jon's feet, crimson eyes fixed upon the half-open doors, where dust motes drifted like shy courtiers. Finally Jon exhaled and the council breathed with him, a subtle easing of shoulders and tension in cloaked backs. Words, heavy as wet stone, weighted in the throats of all present. Tyrion broke the quiet first, his voice soft yet unmistakably sharp. Our ravens bring confession and confession brings proof. The Riverlords will march if Lord Tully calls, and Hoster's son is wavering. Gold may sway him, but gold we trade now for bread. The Reach is restless. Oldtown whispers of forming a council of its own scholars, answerable to no crown. The Stormlands are silent, which to my ear is louder than thunder. He tapped his cane once, a clear punctuation. Each day that passes without a clear design, your grace, is another day the realm asks if the wolf truly means to unite the pack, or simply guard the bones he already owns. Jon listened and felt every border drawn upon his skin like fresh scars. He pictured the Seven Kingdoms as a tapestry frayed by too many greedy fingers, each thread ready to snap if tugged too hard. He had taken the throne not to weave it anew, but to unweave it entirely, to replace threads with something no hand could ever sever. Yet to abolish the feudal chain without plunging all into chaos demanded a patience measured in heartbreaks. He leaned forward, forearms braced upon the table, and met Tyrion's gaze. "I will not buy loyalty with coin or titles," he said, letting each word settle. "We promised the common folk that blood need not breed rule. If we falter now, the promise was ash before it left our tongues." He turned to Sam. "Tell them of the registry." Sam colored, but steadied. "Yes, well, the census teams have begun in Fleabottom. We're counting every household, every trade, recording skill and need both. Once we know who can farm, who can forge, who can read, we can match labor to need across the realm. Small folk will be moved freely, given land where fields lie fallow, tools where forges sit silent, no more tied to a lord's soil." His round face shone with earnest conviction and a nervous sheen of perspiration. But his words carried weight that no Valyrian steel could match. Brienne inclined her head. "The Crownlands accept those teams under guard," she said. "But the gold cloaks remain thin. Reaching every hamlet without escorts will be slow." Davos tapped the map rolled before them. "I fought smuggling tides that turned quicker than noble hearts," he muttered. "If we send sailors up the Mander and the Trident, we can ferry goods and people faster than riders ever could. But ships need wood, and wood needs trees, and half the royal forests burned." Jon folded the map open, with gentle fingers. "Then we plant before we harvest," he said. "Davos, appoint harbor masters loyal to the realm, not their own purses. Let them oversee replanting along the Blackwater banks. We build barges first, flat-bottomed craft for grain and folk alike." He shifted to Brienne. "Expand recruitment for the City Watch, but not from the brothels and gutters alone. Offer service to any man or woman willing to swear to the realm, no matter low or high birth. Pay them fairly and house their families within the city. Loyalty is fed by bread more surely than fear of the lash." Tyrion arched a brow. "And who pays the bread?" Jon glanced at Davos again. "The Iron Bank met with you." "Aye," Davos said. "They'll lend, but they want collateral beyond burnt halls." Jon's eyes drifted to the shattered skyline beyond the ballroom's bare windows. The Crownlands fields would be collateral, he decided. And when the crops rise, the harvest repays. No war levies, no taxes that bleed the poor. We shoulder the risk. Tyrion's mouth twisted in thought. The lords will howl. They would rather the realm's debts lie on peasant backs than upon their gilded purses. "Then let them howl," Jon said, a quiet edge slipping into his voice. "Wolves do not fear the cries of lapdogs." A hush followed. One part reverence, one part unease. It ended when footsteps echoed at the doors, and a page slipped inside, hair sticking up like straw in morning breeze. He bowed, holding a sealed parchment. "Raven from Winterfell, your grace." Jon's heart stirred painfully at the word, and the memory of snowfields and godswood rustling with red leaves flashed behind his eyes. He took the message, broke the wax, and felt Sansa's presence bloom in the words even before he read them. Her hand wrote firmly, but not unkindly. She spoke of grain stores, of wildling settlers aiding in replanting burnt fields along the Gift, of northern freeholders who'd voted to join a council of villages rather than kneel to any holdfast lord. She wrote of experiments in common halls, where each family sent a representative to vote on roads, bridges, and harvest shares. Hope, spelled in stubborn northern script. He raised his gaze and saw the council reading him like a map of their own fears. "The North is building the new way already," he said, voice hushed. "If they can do it with a single summer of peace, the South can do no less." Tyrion's fingers drummed the table. "In the Reach, they'll call this northern nonsense. Bread and cider make rounder bellies than honor." He paused, meeting Jon's gaze with a spark of challenge. "We must show them the change feeds more mouths than the old ways. Feed the belly, win the heart. Then we feed them," Jon said simply. "Send Sam's census teams next to the Reach. Tell them we come not to tax but to tally, to offer new irrigation for their vineyards and mills powered by crown loans. They will lend us their harvest in trust, and we will repay with roads and water wheels that free them from lordly tolls." Sam swallowed. "That will require engineers we do not have." Jon's thoughts turned south to Old Aegon's Hightower University, where maesters petitioned for more than chain links. "We'll ask the Citadel to send apprentices," he answered. "Those who help rebuild will forge a new link of governance, no longer servant only to noble houses, but to all folk. Let knowledge answer to need, not to blood." Nanawu. He felt as he spoke the shape of something rising, slow and fragile as a sapling, but alive. Each sentence laid roots into the cracked soil of the realm. Still, doubt coiled like a cold eel in his belly. Words were wind. Westeros had learned to fortify gates against wind long ago. The council adjourned only after the sun spilled fully through the broken dragon banner, and set the oak table glowing. Papers were gathered, agreements etched in hurried script. Brienne led Tyrell guards to inspect grain warehouses. Tyrion limped off to quill letters spiced with just enough flattery to win merchants' coin. Davos strode toward the docks to manage timber tallies, and Sam sought the library to refine census forms. Jon lingered alone, listening to their departing steps echo in the bare ballroom, until silence folded back over the chamber like a cloak. He turned to the wide windows. Ghost rose and followed. Far below, the streets fanned out like cracks in shattered porcelain. Small folk moved in slow, steady streams, carrying pails of mortar, guiding carts laden with rubble, hoisting beams toward new rafters. The city breathed, ragged but alive. Somewhere, a child laughed, a high sudden trill that cut through the hush, bright as spring water. Jon closed his eyes, letting the sound root in memory alongside war shouts and dragon screams, as proof that the world still seeded joy amid ruin. Later, he walked the streets with a cloak drawn low to hide the crown. Beside him, Davos, also cloaked, navigated the labyrinthine alleys like a man charting familiar currents. They spoke little, the city spoke louder. A baker shouted about loaves priced fair for anyone, noble coin or coppers both. A widow hammered bent nails straight, so she might patch her neighbor's roof. At a crossroads, a pair of gold cloaks argued with a sellsword over a confiscated barrel of Dornish wine. But the quarrel ended not with steel drawn, but with a ledger and an offered compromise: the wine for city hospitals, half the profit for the sellsword. Jon watched, unseen, a flicker of what might rise if rule of law carried no sigil, but the realm's shared good. They passed Septuary Square, where the rubble of the great sept formed a jagged cairn. The site had become a place of quiet gathering. Small folk left candles and simple tokens, lace handkerchiefs, pewter buttons, cracked wooden toys. There were no statues of the Seven now, only fragmented pillars and scorched stone benches. Yet in the absence of shrines, Jon sensed a humbler reverence. People helping people light candles when wind gusted, strangers sharing bread as offerings. Faith, unmoored from marble reliquaries, seemed to find truer footing in open air. Beyond the square, Jon paused at an old fountain choked by ash. A boy knelt there, Arms plunged elbow deep in cold water he had carried bucket by bucket from a nearby well. He scrubbed soot from stonefish carved around the basin's rim. Seeing John's shadow, he glanced up. Eyes the green of river reeds, wide and wary. John knelt beside him. "What's your name?" "Mathos, my lord," the boy whispered, glancing at the wolf. John dipped a hand into the water, helping guide the rag across a stone fin. "Why clean this fountain when the city lies in ruin?" Mathos shrugged. "If the fish look like fish again, maybe folks remember they can drink here when the wells crowd. Can't fix every house, but I can fix this. Little things?" He offered the rag to John, a simple invitation. Together, they scrubbed until more stone fish emerged, their scales pale gray beneath fading soot. Water trickled free, cold and clear, catching a sliver of sun. John rose, palms black. Mathos grinned, teeth bright against grime. John reached into his cloak, drew the iron circlet and held it before him, just long enough for the boy's eyes to widen with startled recognition, then placed it back. "Keep doing the little things," John said. "They weave into something larger than crowns." When he left, Mathos stood taller, rag in hand, the fountain glimmering behind him like a promise. That night, torches flickered along the Red Keep's battered ramparts. John climbed to the Maiden Vault, a quiet tower whose chambers had been stripped generations ago. The open rooftop offered a near unbroken view of the city and the stars beyond, though clouds scuttled low and restless. He lay a map of Westeros upon the parapet, weighting its corners with small stones. Ghost lay close, muzzle upon paws. He traced the map's borders. Here, mountains bristled where iron-borne longships could never sail. There, deserts shimmered beyond the red mountains, where Dorne's princes still eyed the north with wary pride. And everywhere, tiny sigils marked keeps that ruled by right of conquest or court intrigue. He thought of tearing those sigils away one by one, yet that act alone would leave holes, not harmony. He needed something to mend, to bridge. He remembered the boy at the fountain, the cleaned fish, the simple logic that small acts repeated could flood a kingdom with change. A noise startled him, a soft bootstep. Arya emerged from the stairwell, hair windswept, her cloak the mottled gray of far roads. She had returned without raven shout or herald's cry, as quietly as a shadow switching walls. She joined him at the parapet and looked over the map without greeting. Her gray eyes studied the drawn boundaries, the markers of pride and blood, then drifted to John. "If you erase them too quickly," she said, voice low, "men will draw new ones in deeper ink." John nodded. "Then we teach them no ink is permanent." Arya's mouth curved in a wisp of a smile. "Teach them with stories or with swords?" "Both," he said. "But the stories must outlive the swords." She unslung a small leather pouch and emptied its contents. Smooth stones, each painted with simple symbols. An anvil, a loaf, a quill, a plow. She placed them over castle sigils on the map. Gendry smiths. "The Bakers' Guild, the scribes, the farmers," she said. "No banners, just work. They follow whoever keeps order and feeds them. They don't care about titled blood." John watched as the stones covered heraldry that had once terrified whole armies. How many? In King's Landing alone, thousands soon. Across the Crownlands more each week. They practice at night in the guild hall, learning to vote on shares and chores like the free companies of Old Lys. No oaths to lords, only to each other. John felt a spark catch in dry wood. "We'll lend them land and seed." Arya tilted her head. "Give, not lend. A gift can't be revoked. It makes loyalty a choice, not a debt." He absorbed that, then nodded. "A gift, then, the first of many." Lightning flickered over distant waters, a silent pulse of white. Arya peered at the horizon. "Storms brewing. Your council will call for walls and watchtowers. But sometimes you let the rain fall so the fires go out." John thought of the Reach's vineyards, the Crownland's blackened forests, the silent stormlands. He thought of small folk scrubbing fountains, of ships waiting for repair, of census papers mapping need instead of lineage. "Let it rain," he murmured. "We'll plant after." Arya squeezed his arm and slipped away like dawn mist. John remained, tracing the painted stones, listening to the first hushed growl of thunder. In that sound, he heard the realm's fear, but beneath it, he heard potential. The hush before soil drinks sky water, and seeds unfurl into stubborn green defiance. Morning returned with slate clouds and a scent of wet ash. Ravens circled the rookery in restless spirals, and John found Master Luwin's successor, a dour gray-bearded man named Orwell, asleep over a ledger. John roused him gently, then dictated letters. To Lady Olenna's distant heirs inviting negotiations on seed grain. To the Prince of Dorne proposing joint patrols on the Stormlands roads. To Lord Glover requesting northern trappers venture south to teach riverfolk snarecraft. Paid in coin and new steel traps. Each missive bore not the royal sigil of a dragon, nor a direwolf, nor even the seven-pointed star, but a simple emblem Sam had designed. 2 clasped hands encircling a sapling. Roots reached deeper when entwined. Later, council convened again, joined by guild leaders, invited at Tyrion's suggestion. The baker who had cried fair prices now stood among nobles, flour still dusting his sleeves. A mute stonemason, eyes bright with purpose, signed proposals Sam translated. Standardized mold frames for bricks, to quicken reconstruction citywide. A dyer showed swatches of cloth colored by walnut husks and madder flowers, and asked for land by the Blackwater to grow dye plants, promising jobs in return. Tyrion arranged them like pieces on a sevasboard, letting them debate and barter under Brienne's quiet supervision. John observed, intervening only to keep discussion from veering into talk of titles and ancestral rights. The meeting stretched until lamps guttered, and by its end 8 new cooperatives were sworn, small folk and freedmen pooling skills under charters that pledged allegiance not through fealty, but through mutual defense and shared surplus. That night, from the ramparts, John watched barges drift upriver under torchlight. Grain from a Reach warehouse Tyrion had convinced a cautious Lady Oakhart to lend. In exchange, the crown promised a network of stone granaries cooled by river currents, techniques whispered in old town scrolls. Even through distance, John felt the packed pulse like fresh blood through drying veins. The days that followed painted the city in unsteady strokes of progress. Children hauled water buckets to crews mixing mortar. Septons shared scriptures teaching compassion over obedience. Sellswards found steadier coin guarding census caravans than sacking merchant rows. Rumors reached the Red Keep of lords huddled in shadowed halls, grumbling over lost tithes, plotting alliances old as rust and twice as brittle. Yet each rumor carried, too, a tremor of uncertainty. For their own small folk were listening to tales of guild charters and land gifts told by travelers at inn hearths. How do you keep a man shackled to a lord when he has heard of soil he might claim as his own? John met with Sansa upon her arrival, their embrace a moment of winter's hush amid southern heat. They walked the gardens where new saplings of weirwood and lemon shared soil, improbable siblings. Sansa spoke of village councils debating bridge tolls, of free women forging agreements with northern clans long at odds, of harvest stores saved by shared granaries rather than hoarded by bannermen. She worried too, of Karstark zealots threatening holdfasts still loyal to old laws, of Umber youths itching for raids upon southern caravans in feigned retaliation for decades-old insults. John listened, promised wagons of lumber for new halls, and asked her to speak before the King's Landing Council. Let southern guilds hear how northern freeholders governed without castle lords. Sansa agreed, though caution shadowed her blue eyes. Change, she warned, grows like ivy, nurture it, but mind the roots cracking stone. In the throne room, stripped now of melted swords, John addressed a gathering of small folk, nobles and guild leaders alike. He stood not upon the dais, but before it, crown in hand. He spoke of a realm where the worth of a man or woman was measured not by a name, but by the craft of their hands and the truth of their word. He spoke of a council composed of delegates elected from every district, guild and freehold, their votes equal, their service term-bound. He promised roads maintained by joint boroughs, mills owned by cooperatives, and a shield tax where each contributed labor or coin in fair portion to their harvest. the lords protested. A few strode from the hall in crimson-faced fury, but many lingered uncertain, for their own folk cheered wildly in the galleries above, their voices echoing off vaulted stone like the roar of distant surf. That night, John sat alone by a window, nursing aching thoughts. Ghost lay nearby, head cocked to some secret sound. Joan's gaze drifted over King's Landing, fires of camp kitchens burning in smoother patterns, no longer the chaotic flare of looters or desperate refugees. He thought of the Lord's anger, of the common folk's roaring hope, of the fragile bridge between them, built of promises and barley and clean fountains. A soft knock interrupted. Tyrion entered, carrying a decanter of sour Dornish red. 2 iron cups. He poured, climbed onto the sill opposite John. "I witnessed dragons born in fire," Tyrion said, sipping. "Yet I find myself more terrified by farmers voting on grain." John took the cup. "You fear they'll choose poorly?" "No, I fear they'll choose well. If the realm sees small folk manage what lords could not, the old order will snap like rotten rope, and those clinging to its ends will drown. And I include myself among them, for I was suckled on noble privilege. Change may spare no one." He toasted dryly. "To drowning together, then." John drank the wine, felt its bite, and set the cup down. "We'll teach them to swim instead." Thunder rumbled. Rain whispered across roof tiles, washing soot from stone. In the courtyard below, Mathos the fountain boy danced beneath the downpour, arms spread, laughing. From windows and broken archways, others emerged, tipping jars and buckets skyward to catch the clean water sent by indifferent skies. John watched, wine forgotten, as raindrops pummeled the embers of yesterday's ruin and fed the fragile roots of tomorrow's realm. The moon waned and waxed, the city's scarred skin knit. Chartered guilds sent envoys up the Roserad, escorting supply wagons bearing surplus bread to famine-bit villages outside Bitterbridge. In return came casks of honey, artisans skilled in stained glass, and a promise from the Lady of Tumbleton. She would open her granaries to census teams if given equal vote in the coming Charter Council. Word spread like dawn across valleys still dark. Lords who slammed doors one day found them pounded by their own small folk the next, demanding charters for coop mills, elected reeves over hereditary bailiffs. Some lords yielded, others sharpened swords. John spent each twilight writing letters of amnesty for those who adopted charters peacefully, and edicts of seizure for those who shed small folk blood. The parchment stains of war and peace mingled in his mind until dreams turned indistinct, where parchment became snow and blood became ink washing away beneath winter rain. Ghosts' howl jarred him awake one pre-dawn. News had come. Sir Herbert, hasty, of House Chelsted raised banners against chartermen and the Crown lands, burning hamlets that refused grain tithes. Survivors fled to King's Landing, bearing charred tools and mute grief. John summoned Brienne. Within an hour, riders thundered from the Gate of the Gods. 200 charter guards, 50 knight-errants pledging swords for coin alone, and Sir Podrick Payne bearing a banner not of wolf nor dragon, but of clasped hands encircling a sapling. They marched to Chelsted's seat at Gauntlet Hall. Battle, when it came, was swift. Charter archers felled Chelsted's shields from beyond reach of their lances. Small folk within the hall rose in rebellion, throwing open sallyports. Brienne confronted Sir Herbert in the courtyard, beneath a sullen sky. She offered terms: yield arms, relinquish claims, stand trial before the realm's Charter Council. He spat rotten words and charged. Brienne's blade rang like a chapel bell. His mace clanged to cobblestones in 2 halves. When he knelt, bloody but alive, the charter men bound him not in chains but in woven rope, symbol of old bonds recoiling upon their master. Word of the surrender rippled outward like a thrown stone's widening circles. Other minor lords, seeing Chelsted's sigil struck, opened gates when charter riders appeared upon horizons. Some bartered terms. Retain keeps as caretakers if they swore to common councils. John allowed it, for hearts cannot be forced open, but they can be led to see horizons new. Yet with each victory, burden grew. Where lords fled, Governance must rise in their stead. John expanded the census into a great ledger of stewardship. Forges to mastersmiths, fields divided by need and skill, tithes converted to communal shares. Sam drafted charters by candlelight, until wax dripped hardened constellations upon his desk. Ghosts slept beneath, tail twitching at the rustle of quills. In the far north, Sansa faced her own storm. Lords Manderley and Serwyn balked at equal votes for wildling settlers. Sansa traveled holdfast to holdfast, holding moots beneath weirwood boughs, reminding gatherers of the long night and the free folk who bled beside them. She traded ancient grudges for new oaths sealed not by bending knee, but by sharing bread. When John read her letters, he heard the North teaching the South how to trust strangers with knives, once drawn across their throats. Seasons edged forward. The Reach's vineyards yielded a harvest richer than expected, and guild ships sailed casks up the Blackwater, taxed not by lordly collectors, but by market councils, who set fair levy to maintain wharves and lighthouses. Dockwalkers shouted joy at wages set by elected harbor masters. Still, gloom lingered at realm's edges. In the Westerlands, a boy pretender claiming descent from the last Rain Prince raised crimson banners, promising smallfolk lordship in exchange for rebellion. Johns and ravens offering charters and grain, but pride fueled that revolt more than hunger. He gathered a host. Charter guards joined by sellsword companies paid in coin, minted with the sapling emblem. Before blood spilled, he rode alone into the rebel camp, ghost at heel, and spoke beneath a bannerless sky of wolves and lions, alike bound by the same hunger, the same hope. Some listened, others jeered, but when morning came, the boy pretender slipped away, leaving followers unsure whose voice to heed. John left them wheat and carpenters, and returned to King's Landing without a sword drawn. Years might pass before feudal echoes faded into whispers. John knew this. Some flowers bloom only after the gardener who planted them is long buried. Yet each dawn he walked city streets, no retinue, no sigil save the circlet upon his brow. And he watched fountains run clear, heard councils debate wages in stall-lined squares, saw children taught letters by moon-faced maesters, no longer beholden to castle halls. And sometimes, when city bells told the 9th hour and twilight scattered coppers over the Blackwater, he stood upon the same overlook where his reign began, iron crown beneath calloused fingers, and he believed, if only for the length of a heartbeat, that the weight might someday lessen. For among the cracked stones and soot-stained walls, he had heard a different music rising, a low, persistent hum, woven of thousands of voices no single lord could ever command. It surged in bakers' laughter, in masons' song atop new rafters, in children's cries as they traced letters upon slate. It was a hymn of clasped hands and green saplings rooting in charred earth. And though storms still loomed, and proud men still sharpened blades in shadowed halls, the realm itself had begun to answer to a truer crown than iron could fashion, the crown of common purpose, unseen yet unbreakable. So each night, before sleep claimed him in chambers still half ruined by dragon fire, Jon Snow, once a bastard of Winterfell, once the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, now simply a steward of the realm's fragile dream, laid the iron circlet upon his bedside table. And for a moment, as candle flame faded, he felt lighter than he had since childhood, when all crowns were made of snow and melted in morning light. Kanika. The storm that rolled in from the narrow sea did not leave quickly. For 7 days and nights, rain plucked at roof tiles like harp strings, guttered down cracked chimneys, and drummed taut canvas over the nascent markets rising where dragonfire had once seethed. King's Landing settled into a sodden hush. Carts hissed across muddy lanes. Pigeons hunched with wings half spread for balance, and every conversation seemed to begin with the same glance skyward, as if folk feared the clouds might fall entire. On the 8th dawn, the rain exhausted itself, and the city emerged blinking, washed raw, a stone giant a step nearer awakening. In its courtyards, weeds already pierced the rubble, piercing green needles flaunting life where even moss had hesitated. Jon Snow watched those needles with private gratitude, for their audacity mirrored his own. He occupied a modest suite hastily reclaimed from a collapsed scriptorium within the Red Keep. Marble floors still bore ink stains where shattered inkwells had bled, and broken quills lay like tiny bleached bones along the wainscoting. John left them untouched, a reminder that parchment could wound or heal as surely as steel. Each morning he rose before the cooks lit their hearths, buckled a plain gray gambeson, and walked the keep's service passages unseen. Darkness there smelled of damp mortar and old vellum. It steadied him, for when ghosts travel with a man, narrow corridors keep them close and honest. He found Tyrion in the first-floor solar that now served the Hand's office. Though Tyrion claimed the title Hand of the Commons, a distinction that made traditionalists grit their teeth, the dwarf dozed upright in a high-backed chair, quill lodged between fingers, ink flecking his cheek like wayward stubble. Scrolls encroached upon him from every side, rolled and unfurled alike, the pages drooping as though they shared his exhaustion. John cleared his throat softly. Tyrion startled, knocking a candle stub to the floor. "Either you keep the hours of owls, your grace, or I am turning into one," Tyrion muttered, brushing flecks of dried wax from his doublet. "You promised a draft of the Charter Court statutes," John reminded, easing a stack of wax-sealed messages from the edge of the desk before they toppled. Tyrion waved at a sheaf pinned beneath a pewter goblet. "There. 14 articles, each shorter than the last, lest the lords accuse us of poisoning them with ink." He rubbed his eyes. "The simplest part is naming judges by lot. The Gordian knot comes when we must unseat hereditary magistrates without opening the floodgates of vengeance." John scanned the lines, lips moving in silence. "Every district sends 2 names, one learned, one lay. Then the council draws lots. Terms limited to 5 years. Removal by a vote of 3/5. It will do." He set the pages aside. "But you look as if you have worse news than tired eyes." Tyrion sighed and reached for a decanter. "A raven from Sunspear arrived after you retired. Prince Corin Martell congratulates you on your egalitarian experiment, even as he reminds the crown of Dorne's sovereignty. He invites you to parley beneath the Boneway's shadow in 3 weeks' time, and states most politely that should you decline, trade through the Dornish marches will cease until further notice." "Then, John lowered into a chair opposite. "Dorne fears our reforms." "Dorne fears little, but it values its uniqueness," Tyrion said, pouring a measure and sliding the cup across. "If common charters spread unchecked, their princely mystique loses luster. Your abolition slices close to the root of Dornish identity. They bend the knee to no king, because no king has yet offered them a better bargain. Offer one now, and they must decide between pride and advantage." "Then we..." John drank, tongue numbed by the sour burn. "Then we ride to the Boneway." Tyrion's brow arched. A king leaving the capital so soon could embolden restless nobles. "Brienne holds the Kingsguard. Sam the Ledgers, you the Quills," John answered. "If their loyalty hinges on my being within walls, they were never loyal at all. Besides, the road south will show folk a crown that travels where need calls." Tyrion tapped a quill against a scroll absent-mindedly. "Word reached me of unrest in Maidenpool. A certain Septon preaches that crowning baseborn blood invites the stranger's wrath. He rallies fisherfolk to refuse tithe to your census granary." John absorbed that in silence. "Send Sir Duncan Wrecker with 3 guildreeves, not soldiers. Let them take grain and healers. Talk first. If the Septon sees swords arrive, smoke will follow. Wand, you gamble heavy on goodwill." "I gamble that fear has ruled long enough." John rose. "Have the royal host prepared. 100 charter guards, 40 knights sworn to the sapling. Light wagons only. We leave at week's end." Outside the solar, the sun broke through ragged clouds and struck the keep's whetstones, summoning steam that wavered like pale spirits. John breathed the scent of heated rainwater and charred mortar, and somewhere in it found courage. 2 days later Sansa arrived by river, her northern retinue wrapped in fur despite the lingering summer warmth. Where northern boats passed the Mudgate, dockworkers ceased their labors to watch. A rustle of awe mixed with relief, as though a distant lighthouse had sailed into the harbor. Sansa disembarked, and Jon met her on the quay amid clamor of gulls. She wore a gown of undyed wool, and carried no jewels save a circlet of dark weirwood set above her brow. When Jon kissed her cheek, the crowd cheered, some for the queen who was not a queen, others for the union of North and New South. They walked the quays together, Ghost padding ahead, nose twitching at fish stench. Sansa listened as Jon spoke of the Boneway parley, of Dorne's ultimatum, of Maidenpool's unrest. She answered not with counsel, but with questions. About the readiness of granary reserves, the disposition of ships under Davos' command, the schedule of the First Charter Congress. Her queries revealed gaps Jon had overlooked, and he felt grateful rather than chastened. That evening they dined in a windswept loggia, sea salt blowing through missing panes. Tyrion, Davos, Sam, and Brienne joined, though Davos ate little, his thoughts clearly upon rigging and tides. Conversation roamed from the price of tallow to rumors that Ironborn raiders considered a people's fleet to prey upon Westerosi coasts, while lords' navies reorganized under charter councils. Sansa's gaze sharpened at that. If Asha Greyjoy still holds Pike, she mused, she might relish striking at fractured power, yet she respects strength fast-wielded. Send her a Mason cooperative, free of charge, to rebuild after last winter's storms. Along with 3 hostages, volunteers from guild families, sworn pact that no raiding occurs while they work. Meet her brutality with generosity and accountability both. Venom. Tyrion laughed into his wine. Our Lady of Winterfell learned the game and wrote new rules. Sansa always wrote new rules, Jon said, and saw her cheeks flush with remembered hardship rather than praise. By lamplight, later that night, Sansa found him alone in the rookery, watching a rook with broken wing nod atop a perch. You will carry too many worlds inside you if you let them, she warned softly. North, South, free folk, small folk, lords, guilds, it will tear you apart unless you tether those worlds to something immovable. Jon stroked the rook's feathers gently. I have no immovable thing, only ghosts and stubborn hope. You have us, she said, placing a hand over his and the bird alike. The rook did not flinch. Hope shared is a pillar. The host departed 3 mornings later. Sansa remained in King's Landing as regent, flanked by Brienne and Sam, while Tyrion rode with Jon. The dwarf claiming his crooked legs ached less in a saddle than upon stone stairs. They followed the King's Road south, at a pace measured deliberately slow. Enough for small folk to gather at each stop. Enough for grievances to surface. Enough for grievances to surface. Enough for Jon to kneel in mud listening to midwives recite shortages, and for Tyrion to scratch promises onto wax tablets. Grain wagons accompanied them, gifts far heavier than gold. At Bitterbridge, a delegation of Dowager Lady Caswell met them, flanked by her miller's cooperative. She offered seed grain stored in hidden cellars through the long night, requesting in return only a written guarantee that her fields, once leased to tenant farmers, would transfer to those families outright upon her death. Jon drafted the accord himself. The old lady signed, her gnarled thumb trembling, and wept when Jon addressed her by name, rather than title. They left the Manor Valley greener than they found it. Yet rumor outpaced them. Talk of a true king traveling without banners, dispensing no punishments beyond the promise of work. Some whispered he could cure barren fields, others claimed he forbade any man to kneel. The stories delighted Tyrion. Let myth run before us, he quipped. Reality may never catch, but the chase alone uproots old truths. Near the ruins of Summerhall, they encountered a band of hedge knights, sporting faded black dragons upon crimson. Their captain, Ser Maribald Rivers, declared loyalty to the last true Targaryen claimant, Prince Daeron of the Blackforge, a smuggler bard no one present had heard of. Jon dismounted to parley, cloak dripping with road dust. He invited the company to sup with his guard. Meat spitted over open fire, no tent walls between. Ser Maribald joined warily, his hand never straying far from sword hilt, yet by night's end he sat cross-legged beside Tyrion, debating the virtues of common courts. When dawn tinted the sky, Maribald tossed his tattered banner into the flames and offered swords to the charter cause. provided his men earn coin rather than titles. Jon accepted, but told them they must learn masonry first. Chelsted's burnt hamlets needed hands. The knights balked until Jon lifted his palms, calloused and scarred, proof that a king's skin was not exempt from labor. They followed. 3 leagues north of the prince's pass the road narrowed to a wind-carved notch. Here, the Dornish rowan and stormcloud pine interwove their roots, and earth smelled of resin and sun-baked stone. The Boneway loomed ahead, its switchbacks etched like ribs against jagged cliffs. At the pass's throat, martelled banners rippled, sun and spear upon orange field. Jon's retinue halted. Knights sat their horses stiffly. Charter guards shifted spears. But Jon rode forward alone, Ghost pacing at heel. The direwolf's coat striking a flare of unease through the Dornish garrison. Prince Corin Martell, lean, silver-streaked, eyes like smoothed amber, waited beneath a canopy of dyed silk. No soldiers flanked him, only 2 attendants and his daughter, Lady Alliandra, whose gaze betrayed curious amusement more than caution. Corin inclined his head. So the king comes not with hosts, but with a hound fashioned from winter. His voice was warm sand over flint. I honored the gesture. Jon dismounted, meeting the prince's eyes without smile or challenge. I come to hear Dorne's voice from Dorne's own lips. And if Dorne says keep your charters and your saplings, we tend cacti. They thrive without foreign water. Then Dorne keeps its ways, Jon answered. But let trade remain the blood between us. The river need not be dammed to prove its source. The prince considered, amber eyes narrowing. You speak in water while your men speak of soil, granting land to tenant farmers, dismantling titles southward. A generous river becomes a flood to lowlands. Dorne fears drowning. Jon gestured to the stony ravine. Show me where floodwaters might collect here. Your realm stands above our plains, but high ground gains no harvest if plains burn. Share what grows unique in this climate. Spices, water rights technology. In return, we offer grain routes under charter escort. Guild artisans to reinforce your aqueducts against summer drought. No throne tax, only equal exchange. Alliandra stepped forward. Trade is easier promised than protected. What stops Ironborn or pirate from striking caravans under your banner? Tyrion, who had ridden up quietly, raised a hand. Letters of marque, issued by Charter Congress, permit guild flotillas to serve as armed convoys. They answer to merchant councils, not crowns. Present your own captains, share command, share spoils of confiscated raiders. He offered a thin smile. Piracy fought with profit tends to strangle itself. Corin turned that over like a gem between fingers. And feudal lords who lose tariffs on desert caravans, they will ride against you. Will your guilds stand then? They already stand. Lords who cling to tariffs find themselves guarding empty roads while commerce flows elsewhere. Tyrion shrugged. Gold blood dries quickest when coin diverges. A faint smile etched the prince's lips. You would wage war with ledgers. With ledgers, Jon agreed, and with open wells drilled where once only castles drank. The prince studied him for a long breath, then beckoned an attendant, who produced a scroll bearing a sun seal. A memorandum. Trade in kind, mutual escort responsibility, optional observer seats for Dornish envoys at your charter congress. No oath of fealty required. Bring this to Sunspear within 1 moon's turn, signed, and Dorne will open its passes. Then Jon took the scroll, heart easing. I will sign, provided Clause 7 includes guild arbitration for disputes, not royal courts. You haggle already, Alliandra laughed, and Jon heard in it not contempt, but delighted challenge. The prince's lips twitched. They parted at sunset. Tyrion exhaled as if surfacing from deep water. You manage politics like a blacksmith. Heat, hammer, cool. Useful, but remember some metals crack unseen until the final strike. We must check for fractures. Then sure. Jon glanced back at the rugged silhouettes. We will cross that pass often. Fractures show under repeated weight. The return journey veered east to Maidenpool, where the Septon's sermons had fermented into barricaded streets. Fisherfolk braced nets across alley openings, armed with gutting knives and oar-haft clubs. Jon's escort paused at a ridge overlooking the harbor. Tyrion advised caution. Davos recommended waiting for reinforcements, but Jon shook his head. He walked into the town at noon with Sam, unarmed, save for the iron circlet. Ghost padded silent, sniffing the salt winds. Townsfolk murmured from shuttered windows. Children peeked around smoke-blackened stilts. At the Sepyard, a throng gathered, listening to Septon Arlen thunder upon a dais of crab pots. "Beware the false shepherd who overturns the Almighty's order," he shouted. "Hair plastered by sweat. Beasts may come claiming gentle rule, yet beneath their hides lies hunger for your daughters, your coin, your very souls." When he saw Jon approaching, his sermon stumbled. There, the deceiver himself. Crownless though crowned, bastard though king, shepherd though wolf. Ah! Jon mounted the dais steps. Ghost sat at its base, crimson eyes gleaming. Jon surveyed the crowd, noting lines of fear, of hope, of exhaustion. "I was bastard. I was wolf," he began, voice plain, amplified not by volume but by steadiness. "But I was shepherd too, of watchmen upon a wall who stood for those who never knew their names. When the dead marched, titles meant nothing. Courage and unity saved your children. We propose neither devilry nor subjugation. We propose each of you holding the very nets you labor with, the boats you mend, the stalls you sell from, land to those who till it, profit to those who risk the waves. When there?" A woman's voice cut through, cracked with brine. "And the faith? Who guards the sept if lords fall?" Jon turned to her. "You guard it, as you always did, by living the teachings. A sept stands not upon stone, but upon the kindness enacted within its walls. The stranger judges lords and small folk alike." He faced Septon Arlan. "Join us. Guide the fisherfolk's charter with wisdom." Arlan spat. "Blasphemy invites plague." Jon opened a grain sack Sam brought, letting pale kernels scatter across the dais. "Plague comes when bellies empty and despair breeds. We offer spring seed, loan forgiven if storms ruin your catch. What say you?" Silence swelled, heavy as storm cloud waiting to burst. Then the brine-voiced woman stepped forward. "Septon blesses weddings but never patched hulls," she said. "If the king patches hulls, I say let him bless too." Others murmured assent. Arlan's jaw clenched, but his authority seeped away like low tide. By dusk, the nets were unstrung, the barricades dismantled. Charter scribes set up trestle tables in the Sepyard, recording nets owned, boats shared, catches owed. Jon helped carry barrels of barley into the common storehouse. Ghost-nosed children who had never seen a direwolf, their shrieks of awe echoing along fishy lanes. Septon Arlan fled to the hills. That night, Jon lay upon a pallet in the town hall, listening to waves slap pilings. Tyrion scribbled by lantern, drafting provisional bylaws. "A king who hoists grain sacks may find his back sorer than his throne cushions," he remarked. "I never liked cushions," Jon muttered into darkness. Sam snored softly, quill fallen from loose fingers. Davos sharpened a dirk in the corner, though whether for blades or for the rhythm of the scrape, Jon could not tell. In all the simplicity, the scratch of quill, the hush of surf, the faint smell of tar and barley, Jon sensed the beating heart of his unmade realm. It thumped arrhythmically, strong and uncertain, like a child's eager pulse. They reached King's Landing by mid-autumn. Wheat sheaves draped over wagon sides, and Dornish pomegranates glinted like ruby promises. Jon entered the city without escort, light cloak brushing cobbles slick with early frost. He found Sansa in the grand courtyard, newly cleared of rubble and seeded with hardy grass. Children chased each other between saplings. A mason's apprentice recited letters to his younger sister beneath a lantern pole. Sansa greeted him with a silent embrace. "Storm's End declared for the charter yesterday," she whispered, excitement and nervousness twined. "Lord Edric Storm offered his seat as a Congress Hall, if guilds reinforce the sea walls. I think he means to wed a shipwright's daughter, scandalizing half the Stormlords." "Benny," Jon smiled against her hair. "Love or politics?" "Both, I suspect." She stepped back, studying his dust-streaked face. "You look thinner. Roads feed less than feasts." But the journey filled other hungers. He gestured to the courtyard. "This is new. Built by carpenter cooperatives," she said, pride warming her voice. "No lord funded it, yet every child plays here. They named it the Commons Garden." Tyrion appeared, limping but animated. "Our Charter Congress convenes in 4 days. Delegates pour in like ants to spilled wine. Some lords attend disguised as observers. Others send threats by raven. The city tailor cannot stitch banners fast enough. Davos. Davos saluted them with a rolled parchment. "And here's the Ironborn response. Asha Greyjoy accepts your mason gift. Hostages welcomed, raiding halted for a season. One stipulation, a charter seat for Pike." Jon exhaled, the tide of events pulling like undertow. "Give her 2 seats, one for captains, one for salt wives. Let Pike's own factions resolve their disputes in council." Sansa laughed softly. "You toss lions among wolves and call it diplomacy." "They share teeth," Jon said. The Congress opened beneath a canvas pavilion erected upon the rubble of the old dragon pit, simple enough to hush even the proudest throat. Delegates crossed its threshold beneath a banner of clasped hands and sapling. There were lords in plain cloaks, freedmen with calloused palms, septas clutching prayer books, maesters flaunting new chain links of tin and clay, Dothraki hydrics wearing braids bound in woven straw, even 2 summer islanders bearing scrolls of trade law. Each was sworn to speak, then listen, then vote. The first matter: ratify the Charter of Equal Burden, the foundation piece. Sam read aloud, voice trembling but clear. It declared rights to land use, labor value, tribunal courts by peers, repeal of hereditary tax exemptions, and the levy of a shield duty payable by every adult according to capacity, not lineage, to maintain communal defense. Debate spanned 3 days, during which Jon spoke only once, to remind all present that each clause might feed children or orphan them. When final votes were tallied, wooden counters dropped into bronze urns. The charter passed by slim margin. That night fireworks burst above the Blackwater, gifts from Corthian merchants seeking favor. Color washed the ruins. Green, scarlet, silver. Jon watched from the Red Keep's tallest intact turret, one hand resting on Ghost's ruff. The city answered with cheers that echoed along the riverbanks like roaring surf. Yet Jon's heart beat heavy. Passing a law was planting seed. The storm season still threatened seedlings. He descended to the Great Hall, where piles of precedent scrolls awaited signature. Candlelight flickered on wax pools. He uncapped the quill, and the sudden scent of oak gall ink filled his nostrils like autumn forest after rain. As he pressed pen to parchment, he remembered his father. Eddard's patient gaze, the feel of calloused fingers guiding infant hands over carved wooden practice swords. Honor, his father taught, is the seed of law. Yet Ned Stark's honor could not save him from a system that devoured the honorable first. Jon signed, forging a path that might spare other fathers. Brienne entered once the last seal was stamped. She removed her white cloak, now gray with city dust, and laid it over a bench. Ravens from the Vale report, Lord Robert Arryn has fallen ill. House Roy seeks guidance, fearing rival lords will press claims if the boy dies. Jon rubbed his temples. Send Master Orwell with a healer's company and a charter envoy. If the boy passes, propose a regency not by blood but by Vale electors, knights, guilds, and small councils. Let them taste shared rule before power consolidates again. Brienne nodded, then studied him. You sleep too little, eat too little. Steel dulls if never rested. The Kingsguard can guard without you one night. Jon attempted a smile. King's burdens are lighter than the walls sometimes felt. But I will rest. He kept his promise, till a scream tore across the midnight courtyard. Jon jerked awake upon straw mattress and reached instinctively for Longclaw. Though he had not borne it since summer, Ghost already sprinted through the doorway. Jon followed barefoot, cloak thrown over shift. The scream came again, from the Commons garden. There he found a girl clutching a boy's limp form near the saplings. Blood soaked the grass. A shadow fled toward alley. Jon knelt, pressing cloth to the wound. An arrow lodged in the boy's flank. Eyes rolled white. Around them children cried, guild guards shouted. Jon lifted the child, carried him to the new infirmary while Sam and healers swarmed. Hours bled into dawn. The boy lived. Arrowhead missed the lung, but the attacker escaped. Witnesses saw a black cloak, no banner. Fear slithered through the city the way rot creeps unnoticed until beam gives way. Council convened again, this time heavy with fatigue. Tyrion produced rumors of a secret league, heirs of dethroned lords, plotting to incite chaos and discredit the charter. A child's death in the Commons' garden would serve. The council voted emergency patrols, but Jon vetoed curfews. Locking streets scars trust, he argued. We flood light, not shadows. Double lanterns, open watch posts staffed jointly by guild guards and the remnant gold cloaks. Still, he sensed eyes watching every step. Ghost growled at unlit archways. By the week's end, 3 more incidents. An arson at a granary stall, a brawl between guildsmiths and mercenaries, stoked tension. Sansa's poise frayed. Sam's hands shook as he wrote. Arya returned without fanfare, dropping from a parapet one dusk. Seeds of vile men, she said, eyes like river ice. They call themselves the Bannerless Brotherhood, sons of spurned houses, sellswords owed coin by dead lords, and zealots fearing women's votes more than dragon flame. Where? Jon asked. Everywhere water stagnates, she answered. But I found their nest, deep cellars beneath the Hill of Rhaenys, once wine vaults, now lair. Jon summoned Brienne Davos and a score of mixed guards. They descended through shattered catacombs by torchlight. The air reeked of sour wine and sweat. From darkness voices rose, chants twisting the faith's hymns into hate. Jon signaled, and they advanced. Battle in tunnels is ugly music, steel clanging off damp stone, boots slipping in mud, shouts clipped to echoes. Jon fought with a mace, blunt to avoid killing where capture might yield information. Ghost lunged through gaps, crimson eyes flashing. Brienne's sword lit the dark like a wheeling comet. Within minutes, resistance faltered. They seized ledgers naming conspirators. Minor lords, merchant captains, 2 maesters. Among the prisoners lay Septon Arlan, robe torn, eyes wild. In the torchlit aftermath, Jon knelt beside him. Why so fear among children? Arlan spat blood. Because fear is truth. A realm ruled by baseborn cannot know the Father's order. Better chaos now than damnation eternal. Jon rose, shackles clinking in his hands. Chaos ends here. You will stand trial before the charter court you despise, judged by peers you sought to murder. If they condemn you, it will be law, not revenge. Monsieur, Arlan laughed, bitter. Law written yesterday, broken tomorrow. Law written by the many endures, Jon replied. Pray it finds mercy. The public trial filled the Dragon Pit pavilion. Delegates listened. Small folk thronged hillsides. Evidence was laid bare. Arrows fletched with house colors, ledgers of paid saboteurs, Arlan's sermons calling the death of innocents the stranger's will. A jury of 12, 6 noble, 6 common, deliberated 2 hours. Guilty. Sentence. 20 years labor reconstructing towns razed by the very lords who funded his cause. No gallows, no pyre. Worked to atone. Some cried leniency, others cruelty. Jon felt only weary hope. Winter's first frost silvered rooftops the night Arlan's chain gang left the city, picks over shoulders. Jon watched from the mudgate as they marched, each man bearing nothing but tools and bread. He turned to Sansa. Do you think they might change? Not all seeds sprout, she whispered, but bury enough and one finds soil. Snowflakes swirled, fine, hesitant. Jon extended a hand. A flake melted on his scarred palm. Far above, the broken spires of the sept canted toward a hard gray sky. But dawn's band of rose already probed the horizon. Bells tolled from the new guild hall, summoning forges to light. John closed his fist around the wet warmth of melted snow, as though holding the fragile heart of what he had wrought, and felt it beat. He walked back through streets still half dark. Lanterns glowed in every window now. After the attack, citizens kept watch from sills, greeting patrols by name. A baker shouted free rolls for charter guards. A potter stacked tiles to patch a neighbor's roof. In the commons garden, fresh straw covered blood-stained grass, ready for winter seedlings. The boy who'd taken the arrow hobbled across the square, wooden crutch underarm, ghost of a grin on his thin cheeks. John paused to gift him a smooth stone embossed with a sapling, a token minted for Congress delegates. The boy's eyes shone as though handed Valyrian steel. "Plant it inside," John said, pressing the token to his chest. "Change grows where hearts till." The boy nodded, tears bright as morning frost. In the great hall, Tyrion awaited with new parchments. 3 western houses petitioned to cede keeps to their miners' councils, provided they keep quarter share of iron revenue. Meanwhile, the Citadel requests recognition of an independent college of civil arts, chain links in masonry, agriculture, and public letters. And Dorne has returned the trade scroll signed, with 2 amphorae of fine summer wine. John sat, chuckling. "Pour an oristui. We will toast." "Netermanti." Tyrion poured. Flame from braziers revealed lines of fatigue in both their faces. Yet behind it, giddy astonishment. Cups clinked. "To unlikely futures," Tyrion said. "To patient seeds," John answered. He drank, tasting dust and promise, and the faintest sweetness of grapes grown in sun-baked sands far south. As he swallowed, a thought surfaced unbidden. One day, this realm might call itself by no lord's name, no conqueror's claim, only by the shared labor of its people. And if that day came, they might forget the man who once wore a plain iron circlet. John found that prospect comforting, like the hush before snowfall. For now, he set down the cup and reached for a fresh sheaf, quill poised. Ghost curled at his feet, tail flicking. Outside, hammers rang. Children laughed. Bells tolled again. Life forging onward, blow by blow, word by word, seed by stubborn seed. And now, the days of early winter grew short. The sun, a reluctant guest, peeking low over a city that changed with every tick of its passage. Winds swept from the Blackwater, bearing the tang of sea salt and the earthy musk of churned fields. For charters had sent new plows to every quarter, and rain now grew even between scorched stones where fire had once raged. King's Landing felt reborn and raw, as if half her nerves were exposed, every sound too loud, every color too vivid. Jon Snow, the king who would not rule, found himself both at the city's heart, and somehow always on its outskirts, standing on thresholds as change moved through the realm like the first slow melt of spring ice. He rose before dawn most mornings, and wandered the waking city with ghosts trailing at his heel. Each day began anew. The clatter of market carts down muddy lanes, the flicker of lamps in guild halls where apprentices rehearsed debates for the coming Congress, the steam from communal kitchens rising like banners of hope. He passed soldiers of the Charter Guard, boys and girls of no great name, arms inked with fresh marks of their new stations. He paused to speak with bricklayers and bakers' wives, to listen to small folk share plans, fears, dreams. He tried to remember every face and could not, for their number had grown beyond counting, and each was the true map of the kingdom he struggled to shape. Tyrion haunted his footsteps at odd intervals, a shadow dressed in the battered finery of a nobleman's leftovers. He moved with an energy Jon envied, as though surviving so many wars and betrayals had finally freed him to be no one but himself. They met often in the city's strange new public spaces, once in the newly rebuilt Smith's Arcade, where Gendry now led a crew of smiths, each paid by share, not master, once in the Commons Garden, where children staged mock congresses and argued over the fate of stolen apples, before a self-appointed bench of ragged peers. Tyrion's laughter was sharp and knowing. "You've done it, Jon. You've let the wolves loose among the sheep and found they wished only to build their own fences." Jon smiled, but his eyes remained shadowed. Sometimes on nights when sleep would not come, Jon climbed to the highest point he could find, the half-ruined tower above Maegor's Holdfast, where the wind howled and the city lay revealed like a map unrolling under stars. Here the city's breath rose and fell in the night, and Jon remembered the wall, the great white wound in the world that had marked the edge of all he had known. Now there were no edges, only new beginnings. He felt both the terror and the ache of it. With winter's proper arrival came the first great Congress of the Charter Realm, a gathering unlike any Westeros had ever seen. Delegates arrived daily by foot and horse and riverboat, crowding the city's squares, the inns, the broad halls carved from the bones of ruined palaces. They came from the north, women in bare fur cloaks, wildlings with faces burned by snow and wind, maesters with new tin links and charter tokens hung at their necks. They came from the Reach, bright with summer colors and armed with arguments for new irrigation canals and rights for field workers. They came from the Vale, bringing cheese, honey, and cautious questions about the fate of the last boy lord. Dorne sent envoys veiled in silk, with amphorae of wine and a roll of trade proposals as long as the King's Road. Jon watched it all from the outside, refusing the dais raised in his honor, choosing instead a simple bench in the wings beside Sansa and Arya. Brienne stood near him, the Kingsguard cloak thrown over her mail. "They will look for you to decide everything," she murmured as the hall filled. Jon shook his head. "I am not here to decide. I am here to listen." Nantara. The sessions stretched for weeks, debates tumbling through daylight and candlelit evenings. On the first day, Samwell Tarly, flushed and earnest, read aloud the new oath of Commons: to labor for the good of all, to judge by merit not birth, to defend the peace, to yield consensus rather than rule by sword. The room echoed as every delegate repeated the words, voices stumbling but determined. Some lords sneered, others bowed their heads. Arya grinned, sharp as a blade in the shadows. Sansa squeezed Jon's hand. The matters debated were endless. Tithes, field rights, charters for new guilds, shared roads, rules for new courts. Each proposal birthed hours of quarrel, the old ways clinging like ivy, the new rooting deeper with every argument. Tyrion managed the hall with a wit that disarmed even the surliest Vale Knight, weaving insults into riddles and laughter into truce. Davos played peacemaker, Sam the scribe, Sansa the voice of the North's hard-won unity. Gendry rose to speak for smiths, Maester Orwell for the Citadel's reformers, and Mathos, the boy who once scrubbed fountains, now led a youth contingent demanding schools for every borough and a say in all things that touched the commons. Jon's heart swelled at the sight. Children who had known only fear now demanding the world's remaking. Each night, Jon listened to reports from the city's watch. Attacks by the bannerless Brotherhood diminished after the public trial and sentence of Septon Arlyn, but threats lingered in the corners of conversation. Arya, who slipped away nightly to prowl the rooftops and the city's veins, brought news of plots averted, banners burned in secret, would-be assassins turned aside by common folk, unwilling to see the old ways return. "It's not swords they fear now," Arya told him. "It's the stories, the ones the bakers and masons tell in the taverns, about a king who walks the city before sunrise, who remembers names, who refuses to sit the throne. You're becoming a ghost story for lords who still believe fear is enough." No. When the Charter Congress finally passed the laws of the New Order, repealing lordly rights to levy taxes or raise arms without a Congress vote, binding all justice to open courts with elected jurors, granting land and shares to those who worked them, the city erupted in celebration. Bells rang, fireworks burst again over the Blackwater, and songs new and old spilled from every window. Jon stayed late into the night in the Commons garden, watching children and laborers dance together, Sansa and Arya among them, and Brienne grinning at the edge of the firelight. Tyrion brought a jug of summer wine and sat beside Jon, silent for a time. "You know what they will call this in years to come?" Tyrion asked, swirling his cup. "The beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning. Depends who writes the songs. But either way, you did what none dared. You let the future in." "Betty." "I did nothing alone," Jon answered, watching Sansa's face gleam in the torchlight. Arya's laughter sharp and free. "I only stepped aside." "Sometimes," Tyrion said, raising his cup. "That's the bravest thing of all." The seasons turned, and with them the life of the realm. Winter's grip held but did not strangle. The new granaries brimmed with the first communal harvest, and grain flowed out to distant villages by barge and wagon, guarded by mixed patrols of guildsmen, ex-knights, and former sellswords, who now drew pay from charter coffers. Not noble purses. The Thraki sent an embassy, bringing wild horses and demands for pasture in the crown lands. The Congress met and negotiated, granting a district to their care on the promise of peace and shared trade. Even Pike sent word, the Ironborn Council inviting mainlanders to witness their first election, an event marked by 3 fistfights and only 1 sword drawn, which all agreed was progress. In the north, Sansa returned to Winterfell, governing not as queen, but as first among equals in a council of freeholders. She wrote weekly, long letters filled with news of wolf packs returning to old woods, wildlings settling as far as the stony shore, and children growing who would never kneel. Arya left again, chasing rumors of unrest in the east, and her letters, when they came, were breathless with tales of skirmishes avoided, new guilds formed, and the spread of a coin minted with the clasped sapling. Proof, she wrote, that the new realm travels faster than old hate. Jon stayed mostly in King's Landing, drawn now to the details that made the new order real. He toured the river fords where bridges rose, the brickworks where orphans learned trades, the mills where men and women worked side by side for wages set by open vote. Sometimes he met with the last of the old lords, those who had chosen to remain and adapt, and sometimes with those who had not, hearing their grievances in the new open courts. To some he granted tracts of land in trust, to others he offered only the promise of justice equal for all. Many went away bitter, a few stayed to help. One morning in the dying of the year, Jon was summoned to the great Congress Hall. The room was filled with faces new and old, and Sam stood before the assembled, holding a scroll with trembling hands. By right of the First Congress, by order of the Commons and the Guilds, by petition of the freeholders and approval of all districts, we offer the Iron Circlet to Jon Snow, not as king, but as first steward of the realm. Will you serve? A hush fell. Jon looked out over the crowd, saw Tyrion's sly grin, Sansa's calm pride, Gendry's eager nod, Mathos' hopeful eyes. He thought of his father, of the brothers he had lost, of the wall and the long cold, of Daenerys and the fire that had remade the world, of Ghost by his side, always silent, always present. He stood and walked forward, the iron circlet in Sam's outstretched hands. He took it and raised it high. I will serve, he said, voice ringing, but only as long as the realm wishes it, and only as one among many. No crown, no scepter, no sword, only the burden of care shared by all. The hall exploded in cheers, but Jon heard only the beat of his own heart. Steady, full, unafraid. Days stretched into weeks, and the new order grew roots. The first winter assembly sent relief to the storm-wrecked Vale, rebuilt a burned sept in the Riverlands, and settled a blood feud in the Dornish marches with coin, not steel. Ships from Braavos and Lys arrived, bringing news that across the narrow sea, princes and magisters watched the realm with wary curiosity. Merchants wrote treaties on their own. Laborers demanded rights by reference to the Westerosi Charter. And in Old Town, the maesters forged new links of law and healing, open to any who passed their exams, noble or not. There were failures. A plague broke out in the Westerlands, and though the Congress responded swiftly, hundreds died before the new system's cogs turned. The Ironborn raided once more, breaking truce, and it took a blockade and a Congress debate to force them to accept reparations. Old loyalties flared into violence in the Reach, when a minor lord tried to seize back a manor lost to his former serfs. Tyrion was nearly killed by poison slipped into his cup, a plot traced to a knight exiled by the charter courts. Jon himself was ambushed twice. Once by a group of old royalists in a wine cellar, once by an assassin's arrow that Ghost caught with his flank, blooding the white fur. Afterward, as Jon nursed Ghost back to health, Sansa wrote, "It was never meant to be easy, Jon, but it is working. Do not let fear make you smaller." He did not shrink. Instead, He pressed harder, inviting the lords to serve as stewards in the places they once ruled, but under guild oversight, expanding the right to vote in council to every adult, with quotas for each craft and district, increasing the size of the charter guard and allowing wildlings, ironborn, Dothraki, and even a few summer islanders to serve. He met again with the Prince of Dorne beneath the red banners of Sunspear, and together they wrote the Treaty of the Two Suns. Open trade, joint patrols of the Boneway, mutual recognition of each other's local charters, and the right to self-determination within a single law. When a slave ship was spotted off the arbor, the Congress declared every man and woman on Westerosi soil to be free and sent 3 ships to rescue the captives. The captains returned, broken but alive, and the rescued joined the city's burgeoning crafts. Jon walked among the new freefolk, Andals and First Men, Rhoynar and Dothraki, men and women of every color and creed. He listened to their grievances and their songs. He judged small disputes in the open air, and once a month presided at the Great Council, hearing cases from every corner of the realm. The days were long, but the nights were his own, and sometimes he dreamed of the Wall, of the North, of wild snows and long silences. But more often, he dreamed of fields golden with wheat, of children laughing, of bells tolling the hour not for a lord's dinner, but for the opening of the evening market, where folk bartered bread for stories and sang new songs of a realm they were building together. Sansa returned each spring to attend the great assembly. She and Jon would walk the city, ghosts between them, silent but sure. Once, as they paused above the Blackwater, she said, "You have done it, Jon. You have built a realm without chains." He shook his head. "We are building it. It is never done." Nin. Arya returned too, each time more herself and more a stranger, face shadowed by distant places, hands calloused from deeds she would not name. She told him stories of the East, of cities that would one day send their own delegates, of distant fires and darker threats that the world must someday face. "But not today," she said, clapping him on the back. "Today is for life." Jon found himself smiling more easily, his laughter coming quick, the lines of old pain fading though not gone. He still bore scars, physical and hidden, but he no longer let them define him. He was no one's king, and he was everyone's steward. As spring deepened, the city turned green and bright. The Commons garden bloomed with cherry trees, and the children ran beneath their petals playing at Congress and Charter, laughter ringing like a promise. The first charter university opened its doors, teaching law and letters and craft to any who would come. The Night's Watch sent its first envoy, bearing a message: "The wall still stands, and so do we. But the realm is safer for your labor." On the first day of the new year, the Congress met in the great pavilion of the old dragon pit. Jon stood before them, iron circlet in his hands, Ghost beside him. He looked out at the faces, lords and ladies, guildmasters and smiths, wildlings and freedmen, old enemies and new friends. He spoke simply, "I am not your king. I am your brother, your steward, your equal. Together we have built something new. Let us tend it together." Then look see. He set the circlet upon the table and stepped back into the crowd. Sansa joined him, Arya at her side, Tyrion and Sam close behind. Ghost brushed against his hand. The realm was no longer a crown, but a chorus. The bells rang, and the people cheered. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs. Almaniwand. Summer's promise crept early across Westeros, bringing a restless flush to fields still healing from the winter's last wounds. The air was heavy with scents of loam and river mint. Green shoots clawed their way up through blackened rubble, and King's Landing began to glow anew, its old bones knit together by the calloused hands of a people who no longer waited on orders from castles, but built their future in the open. The great city, once infamous for its choking press of beggars and gold-cloaked brutes, sang now with the sound of hammers, children's games, and the blustery oratory of council speakers at every market corner. Jon Snow felt it as a tension in the very streets. A kind of shivering expectancy, the whole city waking to itself each day as though learning the world's laws anew. He had never belonged so wholly to the South, but in these hours he wandered as one not needing to belong. Not as king but as witness, sometimes as shepherd, sometimes as merely another soul among many. Most mornings found him climbing the gentle slope to the Commons garden, where the old dragon pit had finally been transformed. Blossoms trembled on new saplings and benches, carved by the Carpenters' Guild and set by volunteer labor, housed knots of folk from every walk of life. Some days he arrived early enough to see Gendry hammering out the day's first tools alongside apprentice smiths, their laughter rising in gusts of breath as mist steamed from their sleeves. Other days he came upon Brienne, watching over the dawn patrol of the Charter Guard. A company of 100 women and men in patchwork mail, faces drawn from every corner of the realm. Brienne greeted him with a nod, her pale hair unbound in the rising sun. And Jon saw pride in her bearing, not for herself but for the company she'd built, the discipline she had nurtured from a chaos of rivalries and doubts. There were moments, in these early hours, that Jon almost believed the old pain could fade. Moments when he'd catch Ghost loping ahead, tongue lolling in rare canine joy, scattering a flock of sparrows from the garden's edge, and think, perhaps there can be peace after all. But the day's business never waited long. The city's new council met now in the open air, in a forum of carved stone steps raised where dragonfire had once shattered marble. There was no throne, only a speaker's circle, and on its broad dais sat the representatives of every guild, every district, every freeholders' community from the Bay of Seals to the Red Mountains. The first order of the day was always the same: a roll call of the living and the lost, the realm's daily act of remembrance. Today Samwell Tarly, Maester now, though his chain bore more tin than silver, and a token sapling pin on his collar, stood before the assembly, voice strong, paper trembling. We have the tally of winter's end: 12,000 new citizens registered since the snowmelt, 312 sick nursed through the fever in the western lanes, 57 children born in the Commons Hospital, 30 named for those who fell in the last war, grain stores at 70%, with surplus promised from the Reach. Reports from Old Town: the College of Civil Arts opens next moon, ready for its first term. Any child, any birth, may learn. Letters from the north say spring moot is underway, and wildlings and Northmen alike vote for river maintenance and road patrols. From the Wall, Commander Pike sends word: we are well, the wall stands, and free folk settlements thrive by the lakes. The long night will not return while hands join as saplings root. There was silence, a warm silence, as if all present let the words take root in them. Tyrion, perched on his short-legged bench at the circle's edge, called, "And how fares our treasury, Maester Sam? Are we so rich now as to coin new crowns with the king's face, or must we mint another batch of barter tokens?" Sam flushed, but met Tyrion's humor. "Charter tokens are in high demand. 3 for every 1 in circulation. The free cities accept them for grain, and Lys has sent an offer: mutual apprenticeships in law and craft. Our council's taxes bring enough for the granaries, the watch, and the road crews. We do not swim in gold, but neither do we drown in debt." Then, a cobbler from the Crownlands stood to speak next, a burly woman named Rowena. "Folk in the lower wards ask for better floodworks, and the river folk say a new ferry is needed. Last one was smashed by spring floods. We'd like to build it ourselves, with tools and coin from the charter treasury." A host of hands rose, and Sansa, returned from Winterfell for the season, presided with a gavel carved from old heartwood. All in favor? A sea of hands, from masons to midwives. The measure carried. Jon watched Sansa at work, seeing in her the strength of Winterfell grown outward, a calm that steadied even the most fractious sessions. She spoke rarely but with certainty, and when she looked Jon's way, he saw the years of hardship in her gaze, softened now by hope. Between them, unspoken, lay the history of a world lost and remade, and a kind of gratitude neither knew how to voice. By midday, as the council adjourned, a score of matters had been resolved: the opening of a new school, the arbitration of a dispute between bricklayers and roofers, the scheduling of the next charter assembly. Yet for all the order and promise, unease ran beneath the city like a cold current. That afternoon, Arya arrived, her presence unheralded but unmistakable. A storm's child in riding leathers, a sword slung low, and a glint in her eyes that meant news. Jon met her on the steps below the market, where she tossed him a waterskin and nodded at the commoners who trailed her with curious respect. "I've been to Goldtown and back," she said, scrubbing her face with the heel of her hand. "The Vale's new council sent me. Problems in the hills. Old lords stirring up trouble, whispering to hedge knights that the new order means chaos, that the sky will fall if the crowning of commoners goes on." Rhine. Jon grimaced. How many are listening? Enough. The knights like the old songs. Easy to promise them glory and land, hard to promise them a share of harvest and a voice at council. She cocked her head. But most small folk don't want their lords back. They want seed, salt, and peace. The lords have swords, but the rest have numbers. They walked together, Arya's news weighing on Jon's mind. "You think it will come to blood?" he asked quietly. Arya shrugged. "Some will try. They'll lose, but it could make a mess." By nightfall, council sent a message. A delegation would travel to the Vale, led by Brienne, to meet the unrest head-on, to offer the hand of the charter before force. Jon wrote the letter himself, words heavy with caution and invitation, refusing to threaten, refusing to kneel. "No king," he signed it. "Only a steward who will answer to the commons." That same week, word came from Dorne. Prince Corin Martell dead of a fever, his daughter Alejandra acclaimed as ruler by council vote. The missive was sealed in Martell gold and perfumed with orange blossom. Its message was both a warning and a gift. To Jon Snow, first steward of the realm, Dorne remains herself. "We shall send 3 envoys to your congress and a shipload of southern grain. But if your council would bind us, remember the son of Dorne burns hottest when caged. Let us govern ourselves or risk a war of whispers." Dearly. Jon met with Tyrion and Sansa in a low-walled garden behind the keep, moonlight dripping through olive branches. "We give Dorne its freedom, but invite their guilds and farmers to join our own. Trade, not laws, will bind us. Let the people vote with their coin and their grain. If Alejandra wants her lord strong, let her see if her small folk agree." Tyrion raised his cup, a toast to federated disorder. "You are more radical than you know." Sansa frowned, or simply wise enough to see that no one can rule all from one chair. The city felt the tremors, and Jon did not hide from them. He visited the poorest alleys, accompanied only by Ghost and a handful of guards. He sat in kitchens and corner markets, listening as folk debated the new world's problems. Taxes too high, healers spread thin, soldiers restless without lords to give them glory. He heard of trade disputes in the Reach, feuds in the Riverlands, and the rising cost of salt and copper. At every turn he asked what could be done, who would help, who would serve. And at every turn he found more hands than he'd expected, more willingness to labor for the realm's good than to profit alone. He received an envoy from the Iron Bank, 3 Braavosi in somber gray. They congratulated him on the charter's success, offered further loans, then pressed for repayment in gold and timber from the royal forests. Jon met them in the old council chamber, now a bright room with wide windows, the walls hung not with banners, but with the names of every village rebuilt since the war. "You have our thanks," he said, "but we will pay only what we can, not what will beggar the people. Our trade is open, buy our surplus, not our future." The Braavosi smiled, more fox than wolf. But Jon saw in their eyes the new logic of Westeros. Here was a realm that would not be bought, not by coin nor crown. One evening, Jon was called to the Commons Garden, where a crowd gathered around Mathos, the boy who once cleaned the fountain, now a young man with hands blackened by ink and labor, and a badge of the city's first youth council pinned to his tunic. Mathos stood atop the old plinth, voice clear and urgent. "We cannot stop here," he cried. "There are hungry in the Shadow City. sick in the western hills, children in Old Town who have never seen a book. If we are to keep what we have built, we must go further. Let every city, every hold, send delegates. Let every council be open. Let every council be open. Let every charter promise not only the right to learn, the right to heal, the right to heal, the right to speak. John stepped forward, and the crowd made space. Mathos faced him, eyes shining, not in fear but in challenge. "We are building the world you promised," Mathos said. "But we must build it everywhere." John nodded. "Then you will lead. I am not your king, but your ally. Tell me what you need, and together we will answer." The next day, John called a special session of the Congress, opening the floor to the Youth Council, the healers, the guilds of Old Town and Sunspear, the wildlings from the Gift, even the sailors from the Summer Isles. What followed was a storm of proposals. Some impossible, some inspired, all urgent with the belief that the realm's story was only just beginning. Tyrion guided the chaos with deft humor. Sansa imposed order with a glance or a gentle word. Arya watched from the wings, silent but sharp, eyes darting to every rising voice. Sam took notes until his fingers cramped, then passed the quill to a Reach woman who wrote twice as fast. Days became weeks as the Congress hammered out new measures. The Charter University expanded to every major city. Every child guaranteed 3 years learning. Every sick a right to care. Taxes were debated, reformed, trimmed where waste was found. The Vale's unrest quieted as Brienne's delegation offered the lords a voice without the whip. Representation by service, not by birth. In the Stormlands, Edric Storm wrote to propose a great bridge linking the realm. Built by the combined labor of every region, each stone inscribed with the name of those who gave labor or coin. And through it all, John walked the city each night, sometimes alone, sometimes with Ghost, sometimes arm in arm with Sansa, or trading riddles with Tyrion, or sparring in words with Arya. He heard the complaints, the fears, the doubts, but also the joy, the gratitude, the new pride. He saw the walls of houses mended, the faces of strangers welcomed, the first festivals of spring celebrated not for kings or gods, but for the simple miracle of the world remade. Trouble never vanished entirely. Schemers plotted in the shadows. Bandits prowled the borders. The free cities eyed Westeros with new schemes of their own. But each time danger arose, it was met not by a single sword, but by the 1,000 hands of a people who had tasted the sweetness of shared rule and would not give it up light. On the longest day of the year, the people gathered in the Commons Garden, the air thick with music and the scent of baking bread. Children danced around maypoles twined with ribbons of every color. Old folk wept to see fields where once only ashes had lain. Mathos, now grown into the city's youngest magistrate, stood with John at the edge of the crowd. "They say you could take the crown again," Mathos said, smiling. "If only you wished." John shook his head. "This realm has no more need of kings. Let the crown rust. Let the charter be enough." The bells rang out, one after another, echoing over the rooftops and far along the river. In the hush that followed, John closed his eyes and listened. Not for dragons, not for armies, not for the old call of fate and doom, but for the laughter of children and the voices of a realm learning, day by day, to belong to itself. He walked then among the crowd, shaking hands, trading greetings, sharing in the food and song. He was not a king, not a lord, not even a legend. He was John, a man among men, steward of the realm's dream and witness to its becoming. Night fell with a warm wind, and John returned home, Ghost at his side, the city alive with light and hope behind him. In his small chamber, he set aside the iron circlet for good, placing it atop the charter that bore 1,000 signatures. He slept with the window open, breathing deep the scent of summer and the peace he and his people had won together. When dawn crept over the city, John woke to the sound of bells, of laughter, and of the world's promise remade once more. The city awoke in a blush of sunrise, coppery light washing the stone towers and casting long shadows through the winding streets where the new world found its footing every dawn. King's Landing moved with the purposeful confusion of a beehive after storm. Rebuilding, improvising, adapting. Children darting beneath mule carts. Coppersmiths hammering in alleyways. Apprentices and scholars disputing at the edges of the commons garden. Along the old city wall, flowers poked through shattered mortar, seated by girls and grandmothers, whose laughter now mingled with the clatter of industry and the deeper, slow heartbeat of a city being made new by those once ignored. Jon Snow woke not to the sound of war horns or the shouting of captains, but to the soft chorus of morning. Sparrows in the eaves, someone sweeping a step, the cheerful bickering of bakers preparing for the day's market. Ghost was already gone, patrolling the rooftops, his pale shape stirring excitement wherever it prowled. Jon washed in cold water, donned simple clothes, and slipped outside before the cooks could press bread and stew into his hands. He liked to walk in those first hours, when the air was clean and the sun threw the city's scars and miracles into sharp relief. It felt, some days, as if all of Westeros walked with him, the burdens of the past and the fragile hopes of the future bound up in every stone he passed. He greeted the porters and night watchmen returning from their rounds, spoke with a midwife about the birth of twins in the Mudgate district, listened to a half-blind carpenter explain a new way to shore up damaged walls with scrap timber and clever ropework. Everywhere he went, people stopped him, not to bow or ask favors, but to give news, offer advice, tell jokes, or argue the latest charter proposal. Jon answered as best he could, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a promise to listen more closely at the next council. In their trust, he felt the true weight of the realm, a mantle heavier than any crown. On this day, he wandered through the commons garden as the sun cleared the rooftops. Sansa was there, talking with guild mothers and freeholder delegates, her hair glimmering like a candle in the breeze. She smiled when she saw him, tired but radiant, her eyes marked by care and sleepless nights, but alive with a satisfaction Jon had never seen in her before. Around her stood representatives from half a dozen districts, women and men, former lords, wildlings, freedmen, scholars from the new university. They were deep in discussion about a dispute over ferry routes and market shares, the kind of quarrel that once would have drawn swords, but now drew only heated words and laughter. "Good morning, Jon," Sansa said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're trying to solve the world's problems with more sense than shouting today." "I think we're halfway there." Jon grinned, feeling the ache of old battles lift from his shoulders. "If you can keep them from tossing each other into the river, that's more than half." One of the freeholders, a wiry woman from the Crownlands named Della, nodded toward Jon. "Your ghost helped catch a would-be thief this morning, chased him into the river, then sat on the bank and waited for the watch to drag him out. Never seen a man look more miserable or more grateful to be caught." Laughter rippled around the circle. Sansa thanked Della and moved on to the next item of business. Jon stayed a while, listening, offering a word where it mattered. But mostly he let the council work. The more he withdrew from their deliberations, the more authority they claimed for themselves, the more the system rooted itself. He remembered Tyrion's advice, given in one of their late-night walks. "Let go. The world will not break without your grip. If you hold on too tightly, you will only choke what you have planted." Jon took those words to heart and found, in their letting go, a kind of peace he'd never known at Winterfell or at war. He left Sansa to her council and made his way to the riverside, where the carpenters and sailors' guilds were repairing the old Blackwater ferry. Brienne was there, towering in her plain mail, sleeves rolled, lifting beams as easily as a man twice her size. She grinned at Jon, sweat streaking her brow, and offered him a cup of watered wine. "We'll have this crossing running by sundown," she said. "If the weather holds and the river doesn't rise, then I ride for the Vale to oversee the new courts. Some of the mountain lords still think justice is whatever they can hold at sword point. We'll see if they can learn a different law." Jon nodded. "You'll need all your patience." Brienne chuckled. "Patience and a big stick. That's what my father used to say." They talked a while about the spread of the charter courts, the new patrols along the Roserwad, the progress of the Dothraki settlements near Maidenpool, where the horsemen had learned to plant barley, and now sent their children to the free school. They argued at first, Brienne said. But the women settled it. A council of mothers, no warriors, just voices and sharp tongues. Now the men follow their rules. Jon smiled, pleased, but not surprised. Change, he'd learned, crept on soft feet and struck hardest where least expected. As midday neared, Jon climbed the hill to the new university. A cluster of rebuilt halls overlooking the city, banners of every guild fluttering from their eaves. The place bustled with energy. Boys and girls reading from battered scrolls, apprentices arguing points of law, foreign scholars exchanging words in the commons. Samuel Tarly, now chancellor, met Jon at the entrance, face flushed with pride. "We've doubled our enrollment since the last quarter," Sam said, leading Jon into a bright hall lined with maps and diagrams. Students from as far as Norvos and the Summer Isles. There's even a delegation from the Citadel here for our moot on healing arts. They're impressed, though they try not to show it. No. Jon listened as Sam described new courses in civil governance, medicine, the engineering of aqueducts and windmills, the growing popularity of the charter law studies. "We have applicants of every background, Jon. No one asks about birth or title, only about skill and willingness to learn. You should see the poetry classes. Full every day. Half the city's children reciting verses to the moon." Mamsisiar. They passed a group of children in the gardens, clustered around Arya, who had returned from a scouting tour of the West and now taught swordplay and languages on alternate afternoons. The children shouted questions about Bravos, the Shadowlands, the names of foreign birds. Arya answered with a smile and a flash of her blade. Every word a story, every gesture a promise that the world could be made wider, not just safer. "Some days," Arya called as Jon passed, "I think I learn more from them than they do from me." Jon waved, feeling a pang of gratitude and a memory of another life, of the shy, fierce sister who had once defied the world just by surviving. The university's moot that afternoon drew delegates from every corner of the city. They debated improvements to the water system, the best way to manage a surplus of grain, the training of new physicians. An elderly fisherman stood to demand more salt be allocated to the fishmongers. A young girl from Flea Bottom proposed a system of neighborhood watches with rotating leadership and equal pay. The moot debated each point fiercely, then voted by raising colored stones. Every proposal that passed was recorded by Sam's new cadre of scribes, boys and girls, former stable hands, even 2 former thieves whose skill with numbers had redeemed them in the eyes of the city. After the moot, Jon sat with Sam in the shaded cloister. "It's working," Sam said, voice full of wonder. They listen to each other, even when they quarrel. Sometimes they compromise, sometimes they argue for days, but no one walks away. Even the ones who lose the vote stay to see what happens next. Jon nodded. It's their city now, their realm. I was only the one who said yes when they asked if it could be different. Sam grinned. It helps to have someone who remembers the old ways to warn us what not to do. They talked until the bells tolled for evening meal. Jon wandered back through the city, stopping at a bakery to share a loaf with 3 orphans, then at the blacksmith's to watch Gendry teach a girl to shape horseshoes. He paused at the market to hear a minstrel's song, new verses about the charter, the old king's crown, the wolf in the garden. In every face Jon saw hope and doubt and the stubborn hunger to live free, to make something lasting from the ruins of war. At nightfall, Jon climbed the city's highest tower. He looked out across the roofs, the lights winking along the Blackwater, the far-off haze where the first windmill spun and new roads cut through old woods. Ghost returned, paws muddy, eyes shining. Together they watched as torches flickered on the walls. Patrols checked the gates, laughter drifted from taverns and squares. The city was not perfect. No city could be, but it was alive, stubborn, growing. A realm ruled by no king but by the will of its people. Every day remade by hands that remembered chains and now reached for something better. Below, in the Commons Garden, Sansa led the council in a festival. Music, dancing, The first taste of the year's mead. Arya spun among the children, Brienne shared tales by firelight. Tyrion presided over a contest of riddles. Sam watched it all with tears in his eyes. Jon stood apart but not alone. The world was wide, the road ahead uncertain. But for the first time he believed it belonged to them all. He went down at last, Ghost beside him, and joined the gathering. There were speeches and toasts, gifts exchanged, vows renewed. Mathos presented Jon with a simple token, a piece of weirwood, carved with the image of a sapling. For planting, the young magistrate said, "Wherever the realm grows wild." Jon accepted it, heart full, and together with those who had built the chartered world, he celebrated the night, no longer as king or outcast, but as friend, as brother, as witness to the dawn they'd forged with sweat and dreams, and the hard, stubborn will to see the world remade. When the fires burned low, and the city lay quiet, Jon walked home through empty streets, the token in his hand and Ghost close at heel. The scent of summer lingered. The iron circlet lay forgotten atop the charter, gathering dust, while the realm itself kept watch, not with swords and banners, but with open eyes and open doors, with laughter in the dark, and the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it. Together, dawn found Jon asleep at his desk, the sapling token resting on his palm. He dreamed of fields in sunlight, rivers clear and swift, the sound of children's voices rising as the city woke again. A world without kings, held fast by the strength of all its people. Oh, Lione. The city entered high summer beneath a sky of dazzling blue, the air honeyed and thick with the scent of bread, lavender, and sweat. King's Landing throbbed with industry and anticipation as midsummer approached, a festival like none before. The city had changed its face again. What once had been the quarter of merchants, cramped and soot-blackened, was now a sprawl of workshops and public gardens. Between their rows, children played at democracy with pebbles and colored scraps, acting out debates and mock votes, laughter echoing from ruined archways, the future rehearsing itself in 1,000 small ways. In the Commons garden, broad canopies of canvas had been stretched overhead, bright banners of every guild and district fluttering alongside the standards of the charter. The saplings circled by clasped hands. Here, every day, the city's heart beat in full view. Traders bartering, singers vying for coins, midwives offering advice, old soldiers teaching drills to the youngest orphans. The great council chamber, once just a circle of benches, now boasted a low amphitheater of stepped stone, ringed by flowering bushes and open to all. A single bell, cast by Gendry's forges, and inscribed with the names of the fallen and the free, hung at the forum's entrance, rung for births, deaths, and votes. Jon Snow awoke to the soft clamor of these bells each morning, and felt, as the world grew lush around him, both pride and a peculiar unease. The city no longer needed him as it once had. The momentum of the new order, though fragile, was becoming self-sustaining. There were mornings when he could slip through streets and squares nearly anonymous, greeted with nods, or cheerful waves rather than supplicant bows. If he lingered, people offered bread or news or advice. But fewer sought his judgment. Most came to teach him what their corner of the city needed next, and then moved on, impatient to build it themselves. That afternoon, Jon strolled the market street with Mathos, no longer a child, but a magistrate in his own right, lean and bright-eyed, with a quick wit and a quicker step. The city bustled as never before, stalls laden with fruits from Dorne and cheeses from the Vale, glass beads from the summer isles, barrels of herring from the north, and casks of honeymead sent downriver on the first of the year's rafts. Every few steps, someone called out to Mathos with a dispute or request. A vendor whose cart had been upturned by revelers, a mother seeking medicine, an old mercenary offering to teach the city's charter guard new tricks with the spear. They paused at a shaded well to drink, children gathering round for a tale. Mathos obliged, telling the story of the first council meeting after the Dragonfire, how the people of Fleabottom argued with the goldsmiths over who would repair the bridges, and won by a single vote. The children, faces smeared with berry juice and dust, cheered and demanded another story. Jon watched with a faint smile. This, he thought, is how change lasts. In the retelling, in a sense of possibility that outlives old wounds. As dusk approached, Sansa found Jon in the library, conferring with Sam over a bundle of proposals. She wore her hair plaited in the northern style, but her gown was linen dyed the color of summer grass, and her cheeks were flushed with sun and pride. "You're to speak at the forum, Jon," she said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "The city's expecting you. It's not every year we celebrate the passing of war with a chartered festival." Jon groaned in protest. But Sam grinned, thrusting a sealed scroll into his hand. "A poem," Sam said, "written by the students. They want you to read it before the feast," Sansa added, "and afterward, you're expected to judge the bread-baking contest. Arya says she'll enter with a pie shaped like a direwolf, but she hasn't promised it will be edible." "Dandy." "All right." Jon laughed and stood. "If I refuse, will the council send for me with a guard?" "Only if you try to escape over the city wall," Sansa replied. That evening, the Commons garden overflowed with life. Lanterns strung from pole to pole cast amber light across a sea of faces, old and young, rich and poor, farmers and sailors, wildlings in patchwork furs, scholars in plain tunics, guildmasters and freedmen, shoulder to shoulder. Music soared above the noise. Fiddlers, drummers, singers in a dozen tongues. Food passed hand to hand, every table groaning under the weight of gifts sent from every region of the realm. The air vibrated with anticipation. This was the first true festival of the Chartered Order, the night the realm would toast not to a crown, but to the labor and hope of its people. Jon took the stage at Sansa's urging. The poem Sam had handed him trembling slightly in his grasp. The garden hushed. He read the children's words, awkward and earnest. Verses about seeds and rain, about freedom and healing, about how every stone rebuilt was a kind of magic, every hand joined in labor a new beginning. The people listened, some smiling, some weeping, and when he finished, applause rolled through the garden, not for Jon himself, but for the words, for the hope they conjured. As night fell, the festival reached its height. Arya's pie, crumbling but fierce in aspect, won a special mention, and a dozen other loaves were honored for taste, beauty, or the stories told in their baking. Tyrion presided over a debate between bakers and brewers about the proper use of surplus barley, settling the matter by awarding both sides equal shares of next year's harvest. Brienne led the Charter Guard in a round of toasts to the mothers of the city, and the wildlings staged a mock raid on the flower stalls, only to be chased off by laughing children wielding sticks and flags. Later, Jon slipped away to a quiet corner where Ghost waited, the direwolf's muzzle flecked with crumbs. They wandered down to the river, the sound of song and bells following them. Jon stood for a long time watching the moon shimmer on the water, Ghost pressing against his thigh. The city behind him pulsed with joy, and for the first time since childhood, Jon felt himself entirely at home. No longer a king or a leader, but a piece of the world helped make. He thought of the wall, of battles lost and won, of the friends who had vanished, Robin Ygritte, Eden Daenerys, all the ghosts that sometimes crept into his dreams. But tonight, the memories felt gentle, distant, grief softened by the laughter of the living. He returned to the garden before midnight. Sansa was dancing with a group of children, Arya perched atop a table, recounting a wild tale of her travels in the east. Sam was arguing with a maester from Old Town about the best method for preserving dried fish. Mathos presided over a singing contest, and Brienne watched it all from the edge, arms folded but eyes bright. Jon moved among them, shaking hands, sharing bread, accepting thanks and jokes, and the occasional mild rebuke for not having danced yet. He felt not pride but deep satisfaction. The realm was bigger than any one man now, and it would outlast him. When Sansa pressed a cup of mead into his hand and made him join the ring of dancers, he let himself laugh and stumble and be pulled along. Dawn was a pink blush when the festival wound down. Jon wandered with Ghost along the city's edge, stopping at the small cottage where he'd chosen to live. A simple place, flowers at the windows, a garden just starting to bloom. He paused at the gate, feeling the hush of the new day, and let himself rest. Days passed, busy as ever. The Charter Council convened each morning, passing new measures. The expansion of hospitals, trade with Lys and Bravos, the election of new guildmasters, the dispatch of a commission to Dorne to study their irrigation systems. Sansa traveled north to oversee a dispute between wildlings and old Stark bannermen. She wrote back that the Council of the North had voted to let a wildling woman serve as speaker for the summer. Arya departed for the Riverlands to investigate rumors of banditry. Her letters, when they came, were full of sly wit and secret pride at the way the villages organized their own patrols now. Tyrion was never far from Jon's side. He had found a place as chief negotiator for the council, delighting in the endless wrangling of merchants and politicians. "I've never been happier," he told Jon one night over wine. "Every day is a new puzzle, and no one expects me to save the world or avenge a house. Just to keep the wine flowing, and the insults witty." He was, Jon thought, as content as he could ever be. Mathos and the younger counselors began planning for the winter ahead, stockpiling grain, arranging for coal and peat to be shipped from the north, training teams of doctors and engineers to travel wherever crisis struck. They sent out a call for volunteers, and within a week hundreds signed on, some for pay, most for pride, all because they believed in what the Charter had begun. As harvest approached, the city slowed, then quickened again, anticipation buzzing in the air. The riverboats returned with apples and pears from upriver, casks of cider and fat sheep from the Crownlands, timber and saltfish from the north. The first leaves began to turn, gold and crimson, as a hint of cold crept into the breeze. Jon walked the city each evening, watching the season change, content to be a small part of something vast and living. News reached them in early autumn. The Ironborn had sent their first elected envoy, a woman named Hara, to the Charter Council. She stood in the circle and demanded equal rights for the islands, recognition of their unique customs, and help rebuilding their shattered towns. The debate was fierce, but in the end, the council voted to grant the Iron Islands a seat at the Moot and funding for new shipyards, provided they abide by the Charter's rules. Hara spat on the ground, then shook Jon's hand. "Better this than blood," she said. "Maybe we'll learn something yet." Dorne, too, sent new envoys, younger and bolder, eager to adopt charter measures for their own cities. "We will not be ruled by the North," one told Jon bluntly, "but we will not turn away from a chance to build something new." Alliances were formed, trade increased, and the Festival of the Charter became a tradition. First in King's Landing, then in every town and holdfast, each adding their own songs, their own flavors. As the nights lengthened, Jon found himself content. He helped plant trees along the city wall, built a library for the children, taught swordplay in the garden when Arya was away. He was asked, from time to time, to arbitrate disputes, to bless marriages, to preside at funerals. He always declined the honors, insisting on his place as only one among many. The people seemed to love him more for it. Winter came, as it always does. The river froze at its edges, and snow dusted the tiles of the Red Keep. But there was fire and food enough for all, and the city endured. In the new year, Jon stood in the Commons Garden with Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Sam, Brienne, and Mathos. They watched as the bells rang and the people gathered, each one holding a candle against the dark. Jon spoke only once, his voice carrying over the hush. "This realm belongs to all who labor, all who dream. Let no crown or sword divide us again." The people cheered. In the lamplight, as Snow drifted through the city, Jon Snow stood among friends, not as king, but as steward of a hope now made real. The feudal order vanished, the future built in common hands. And so it went. Through winter and spring, summer and fall, the realm remade by the stubborn, joyful work of its people, watched over by a man who had once been king, but was now only a brother, a friend, a witness to the dawn they'd all made possible. Cain. The year ripened into its second full cycle. Since the day Jon Snow had placed aside the iron circlet and stepped down into the living sea of his people, the memory of those first nights, the jubilation, the music, the shock of so much hope, clung to the city still, a fragrance lingering long after rain. King's Landing, so long scarred by fire and steel, now hummed like a great, untamed garden. Green swallowed gray stone. Ivy crept up new-built terraces, and from dawn until dusk the markets thrived. Peddlers and apprentices and children's voices braiding together across the labyrinth of alleys and squares. The council, once a fragile experiment, had become the realm's beating heart. Every guild and borough, each village and island, sent their chosen delegates by ship or by road. The city's forums swelled with fresh faces each moon, and debate rarely quieted even after darkness pooled between the stones. The charter was not perfect. It changed as swiftly as the weather, clauses amended and tested, and sometimes thrown out by the same folk who had fought to pen them, but none now could claim the realm belonged to lords alone. John walked the city at dawn as was his custom. Ghost beside him in the iron circlet, now long put away, its sheen dulled by dust and disuse. He carried only a staff, its handle worn smooth by 100 hands. His Sansa's, even Mathos, who borrowed it some mornings to stride the docks and inspect the new ships. The morning found him in the shadow market, where stalls jostled under awnings bright with garlands, and sellers hawked honeyed figs and blue-veined cheese from the fingers. A woman called Lysa, once a scullion, now a council delegate, pressed John for his opinion on the river levy, her quick tongue making the small folk around her laugh. He answered thoughtfully, listened to the complaints of the dock workers, and promised to bring their words to the morning's council. No guards flanked him. None were needed. In 2 years, no attempt on his life had come, for it was well known now that John had no power to give, but that entrusted by the council, and that every blow against him was a blow against 1,000 others. Afterward, he climbed the steps to the forum, where Sam and Mathos already waited, sifting through the morning's docket. The day's agenda was thick with concerns. A surplus of spring wheat that threatened to spoil in the warehouses. A surge of children in the schools, straining the teachers and benches. Rumors from the Stormlands that pirates from the Stepstones were slipping past the blockade. Sansa presided. Her calm now legendary, her voice able to silence 100 squabbling tradesmen with a glance. Tyrion, aging gracefully into a statesman's roundness, managed the debate with sly jokes and well-placed questions, coaxing even the prickliest rivals toward compromise. Brienne, male bright as moonlight, brought news of the Vale, how the mountain clans had, after years of stubborn resistance, sent their first delegate to the council, a giant of a man named Donnel, who spoke little but listened hard. Arya, returned from her latest circuit, recounted the story of the first all-female patrol in the Riverlands. They caught 3 bandits, patched a collapsed bridge, and taught 6 boys to fish, she said. Next, they want to run for council. The old lord was furious. The small folk are delighted. Manani. After the session, John walked with Sansa through the rose-laden lanes that wound around the forum. The city's walls were covered now with vines and murals, scenes from the Great War, but also of harvests, festivals, and children at play. The world is changing faster than I ever imagined, Sansa admitted, glancing at a group of wildling children learning to read beneath a cherry tree. The old fears linger, but each season they matter less. Sometimes I think the greatest danger is our own longing for certainty. Even good change frightens those who have only known wounds. Nendar. John nodded, remembering nights in the haunted woods, the cold dread that change could only ever bring blood and sorrow. Maybe we are not meant for certainty. Maybe only for effort and for care. At midday, the harvest moot convened. Delegates from the north and the Reach, the Riverlands, and even Dorne gathered to coordinate the movement of grain, apples, salted meats. The debate was loud, but ended in laughter and oaths of mutual aid. For the first time, the Iron Islands sent ships not to raid, but to trade. Barrels of smoked herring, bundles of wool, and crates of iron tools, exchanged for southern olive oil and parchment. Hara Greyjoy, their envoy, laughed at the Dothraki merchants' offer of a bride price in sheep, and countered with a wager of strength. She lost, and delivered a longboat full of cider as forfeit. John watched these barters with private wonder. He had bled to keep these peoples apart, and now they bickered as cousins. The summer festival arrived on a day of dazzling sun. The commons garden bloomed with a riot of flowers, and the amphitheater overflowed with song and feasting. Arya presided over a tourney of riddles, her questions sly as ever, while Sam handed out prizes, books bound in the new city press, to any child who could recite all the names of the guilds. Tyrion played the fool, juggling apples for the children, while Brienne refereed the wrestling matches. Sansa and Jon sat beneath a willow, cups of sweet wine at their elbows. "If Mother could see this," Sansa said quietly, eyes shining, "she would not know this city." "Nor would Father," Jon answered. He thought of Ned Stark's stern gaze, the heaviness of Winterfell's walls, and felt for the first time that the past's shadow could be gentle, a coolness in sunlight rather than a chill. At dusk, the council presented the new charter editions. Universal learning, a physician for every borough, the right for any free citizen to petition the forum. Mathos, beaming, delivered a speech full of metaphors about rivers and roots, and the crowd cheered for the simple idea that the realm belonged to every hand that shaped it. Night deepened. Lanterns glowed golden across the city, and everywhere Jon looked, he saw not banners and sigils, but faces, faces of every color and kind, singing and weeping and sharing bread. Ghost slipped through the crowds, a silent guardian, stopping often to accept a child's pat or a crust of cake. That winter, storms battered the coast, and famine threatened a score of villages on the rocky headlands of the Westerlands. The council responded as it had pledged, ships sent with grain, engineers dispatched to repair seawalls, and a company of builders, half of them women, a quarter of them wildlings, set out to raise new homes. News came back of one captain lost, 2 ships battered, but the people endured. Hara Greyjoy sailed with the relief fleet, her ironborn bellowing songs to hearten the storm-tossed crews. Within King's Landing, hardship was met by the city's own. Public kitchens expanded, the sick tended by teams of healers trained at the new university, apprentices organized to carry coal and blankets to the oldest and weakest. There were losses, as always, and some nights the wind carried grief across the city. Jon walked those nights, alone or with Ghost, bearing no torch but his presence, offering what comfort he could. In the darkest weeks, Sansa brought word from the north. Free folk and Stark bannermen together had built a mile-long ice dike to spare 3 villages from flooding, and had voted to send half their surplus to the south. "It is not always easy," she wrote, "but it is possible. That is enough." Spring came. The city shook itself awake, and the festival returned with banners and songs. This time the Reach sent a chariot drawn by 6 goats, the Vale a troop of acrobats, the North a wagon load of weirwood cuttings to plant along the main roads. Arya organized a foot race from the city gates to the river, and a girl from Dorne won, earning a year's tuition at the university as her prize. Mathos presided over the moot, now a young man, his voice steady and warm as he introduced the charter's newest measure. Every district, every village, would elect a winter warden to ensure no one went cold or hungry. Jon found himself more an observer than a leader, and he relished it. The work was hard, the city's quarrels never-ending. But there was a rhythm now, a trust that had never existed in the old order. At the end of each council, Tyrion raised a toast. To change. May it outlive us all. The city's greatest monument at last was not a statue or a palace, but the garden itself. The children planted saplings for every year the charter survived, and the oldest among them watched those trees rise, sure now that the world could become what they dared to imagine. One night, as Jon sat by the water's edge, Ghost beside him, Sansa joined him in the dusk. She looked older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes as bright as the day she'd ridden south. "They ask me who will lead next," she said. "I tell them it is not one of us. It is all of us." Jon smiled, watching the lanterns tremble on the river. "If they ask me, I say the same, and I say thank you." They sat in silence, content. The city breathed around them, and the realm they'd built, together and with so many hands, pulsed on into the dark. A realm where the old chains had been cast aside, where each new day might shape a different future, and where no crown was needed to bind them together, but the patient, stubborn work of every soul who called it home. So the years passed, and the story outgrew the storyteller. John lived, not as king but as witness and friend, planting trees with children, teaching the art of listening, sharing the long work of peace. And when at last his own tale neared its close, he looked on the city that had become a garden, and knew it would endure, rooted in memory, nourished by hope, and crowned only by the hands that made it anew each day.